Welcome back to Between Meetings and Motherhood. I am your host, Alexa Starks. I am the founder of Executive Moms and the editor-in-chief of Mothered Magazine and a mama of two toddlers. And today, we're going to talk about who designed this shit. I want to talk specifically about the gap between school hours and work hours, how it happened, who it's hurting, and why it hasn't changed. So, welcome back. This is the podcast Between Meetings and Motherhood, where we name the things out loud that working moms are whispering to each other, honestly, because everything happens between meetings and motherhood. And this one, I've honestly been wanting to do this for a while because my kids right now are in daycare, so they can go a little bit longer. But my son will start primary school soon, in a couple months. And school time is very different from daycare time and work time. It's not 9 to 5. It's more like, 8:30 to 3. And school is 9 to 5. And somehow you're supposed to cover that gap with what? Your bare hands and sheer willpower? So I want to talk about this mismatch between school hours and work hours, where it came from, why it's still here, who thought of this, why the fact that it hasn't changed tells us everything we need to know about who these systems were actually built for. So buckle up, because this one's got me fired up, and I could talk about systems being fucked up all day. So, first one, this is the problem, and honestly, you probably already know it in your bones. So let's just say it really plainly. School in most of the countries, at least in the US, but most countries, runs roughly like 8:30 to 3. Right? And work runs roughly 9 to 5 for corporate. And honestly, it's mostly like 8 to 6, or, you have the time to commute there, commute out. So there's a gap in the afternoon every single weekday for about 180 school days a year. And I'm not even getting to the point of summer and what happens during school holidays and school breaks. And I'm not even touching that in this episode. I'm just talking about after school. So there's roughly like 720 hours of childcare math that falls on somebody every year, every day of the week after school. And we all know who this somebody is. It's usually the mom. And this isn't a personal failure on moms, and I talk about that all the time. None of this shit is your fault. It's a systems problem. This isn't just a scheduling problem that you can solve with a better planner. This is a structural gap baked into two systems that were never designed to work together. And more importantly, they were never designed with you, the mom, in mind. So before you spend another second feeling like you're just bad at logistics, I want you to take it back, because understanding where this comes from changes how you see it, and how you see it will change everything. So let's do some history. Let's get into where the 9 to 5 came from. So let's start with work. The 9 to 5 workday feels like it's always existed, because for our generation, for us, it has, but it hasn't actually always existed. Where it came from might surprise you. It comes from the mid-1800s. I had to do some research into this. Working people in America, like mostly factory workers and industrial workers during that time, were routinely putting in 10 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. But by like 1890, the late 1800s, that's when the government first started tracking this. And the average full-time manufacturing worker was logging like 100 hours a week. 100 hours. So then labor activists started fighting for a more reasonable 8-hour workday. And at first, of course, it was a radical idea. And then a socialist reformer, guys, I'm a big fan of socialism, where programs should benefit everybody and all people, and not the top 1% or 0.1%. So the socialist reformer named Robert Owen had actually proposed it way early on in the early 1800s, like 1817. And his model was super simple. It was just 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of recreational activities, hobbies and shit, and then 8 hours of rest. And of course, the British government rejected it. And it took decades of strikes and protests and workers literally dying in the streets and in manufacturing plants before real change came. And then there was something called the Haymarket Affair in Chicago in 1886, where Henry Ford was going public with a 40-hour work week. 40 hours, 5 days a week in 1926, partly because he realized that rested workers were actually more productive. Shocking, like mind-blowing. Who could have thunk that rested people are more productive? And then finally, FDR, Roosevelt, signed the Fair Labor Standards Act in late 1930s, which capped the work week at 44 hours and then later revised it back down to 40. But here's the important thing. The 40-hour work week was designed around factory workers and industrial labor. And it was protection against physical exploitation. It was a floor, not a ceiling, and it meant to stop people from being worked to death. But what nobody actually went back and fixed was the assumption baked into that schedule that there was someone at a home, like a woman, handling everything else. The kids, the house, the logistics, the life, the cooking, everything. So the 9 to 5, that wasn't designed for dual income households or for single mothers or for women. It was designed for a worker, a man, who had a wife at home. And so here we are in 2025, still working inside a structure that was built for a family model that most of us don't live in anymore. Okay, let's talk about school and where the school hours came from. So school hours are roughly, 8 to 3, 8:30 to 3. I feel like my high school started at 8:30, 8:40, I don't know. Anyways, somewhere around 8:30-ish. And it traces also back to the 1800s and early 1900s. The original logic, it was about daylight savings. It was about daylight and factory shift. And school was timed to maximize available daylight hours and to coordinate with industrial work schedules. And so in agricultural communities, kids needed to be free in the summer to help with harvests. And in factory towns, the school schedule had to work around the times that families needed kids at work. And then bus transportation added another layer. In the second half of the 20th century, many schools shifted start times earlier, not for educational reasons, but for buses to run buses in staggered shifts across multiple schools and save money. And high schools got the earliest slots because older students were assumed to be more capable of getting up early. And so then 100 years ago, many schools actually started around 9 a.m. And then it was later in the 1970s and 80s that the start times shifted earlier, not because it was best for kids, but because it was cheapest for districts to have buses do the multiple schools and save money. And so then the end time, that 3 p.m. end time of school, became another fixed constraint, and it was built around the assumption that a parent would be at home to pick them up, that someone would be there to watch them. And so again, the assumption was that there's a stay-at-home parent, usually the mother. And so now we have two systems, both designed in an era of single-income households where you only needed one income, and that was sufficient, and both built around a parent who isn't working full-time. And we've done almost nothing to redesign them for the reality that the vast majority of American families now have all adults in the workforce. So, why hasn't this changed though? Why hasn't this changed, and who actually pays the price? Because the honest answer is the people who design these systems don't bear the cost of keeping them in place. When a school district decides not to adjust its hours, the burden falls on families, like specifically working parents, to pick up the slack. There's before school care, after school care, scrambled pickups, kids sitting alone at home or waiting to be picked up because a parent hit traffic trying to leave work, or days off work or for half days or teacher development days that seem to multiply out of nowhere. And so when a company decides that their working hours are 9 to 5 with no flexibility, the burden falls on the employees, and specifically those ones with caregiving responsibilities, the parents. And the data tells us that that's still disproportionately women, the moms. And then there's research from the Center for American Progress showing that working mothers are more likely than fathers to miss work, turn down promotions, or leave the workforce entirely because of childcare and school schedule conflicts. Not because they're less ambitious, But the real gap is it lands on them to pick up the slack. And we saw that in our Future of Working Motherhood report that we published in early January, that around 40% of women are leaving the workforce after they have kids because there's no flexibility in their workplace to pick up their kids early, to be there for the kids when their kids are sick. We know there's going to be sick days. We know there's going to be school closures. And yet workplaces remain rigid. And so here's what makes me like super, super angry, you guys. We treat this gap as a personal problem. We still do. It's crazy. Like a logistic puzzle for individual families to resolve. And we put the weight on mothers to just figure it out, to find the before care, to be able to afford the aftercare, a babysitter, a nanny, have family or grandparents nearby, or leave early, or come in late, apologize for it, hide it, or be grateful when someone covers them for a bit and lets them flex. And we have not asked the harder question of why do we still have a 2-hour gap between school and work in the first place? Because that gap was designed for a woman who wasn't working. It was designed to have a male worker with a wife at home to do everything else. And instead of redesigning the system, we just keep asking that woman, that mom, to be in 2 places at once without missing a beat. And so, I want to be fair. Some things are shifting, and I want to talk about like what's actually been tried, because this is a hard solution to change, and it's really hard to change things. So California passed a law in 2019 that required middle and high schools to start no earlier than 8 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. respectively. And that was driven by sleep research showing that early start times are genuinely harmful to adolescent health and academic performance. And then some districts are pushing that back even further. But some companies, especially since COVID and the pandemic kind of forced remote work, and we all saw that actually worked out perfectly fine for 99% of workers who are in corporate, that they are still doing flexible work or hybrid of some kind. And so we still see like asynchronous work and results-based performance instead of time in your seat. And 4-day work weeks are being piloted in some industries and in some countries with promising results. You guys, I gotta get a sip of water. Getting too passionate about this. Okay. And then some schools are rethinking the like extended day models and after school programming kind of built into the day and wraparound care that doesn't require parents to pay out of pocket for basic coverage. So these things exist. They're not everywhere. They're in very small pockets, but we know they work, and they do work. And the 4-day school week has been piloted in several states, and results-based flexible work we've seen from COVID has shown to actually improve performance and reduce burnout. And we see the extended school day models in cities like New York City and Boston. And so the problem isn't that we don't know what to do. The problem is that we haven't decided, like as a culture, as companies, employers, as school boards and policymakers, that fixing the gap is a priority. Let's just sit with that for a second. It hasn't been made a priority. Until it is, we just keep asking mothers to absorb the cost. And so here's what I want you to take away from this episode. That the gap between school hours and work hours is not your personal failure. It's not your fault. It is not a sign that you're disorganized. It's not a sign that you are failing, trying to piece it all together. And it's not evidence that you can't have it all. It's a structural design flaw. And it is the flaw and fault of policymakers and employers and school boards and society that it's not being made a priority because it doesn't hurt the men in charge enough and the rich men in charge. Because the rich men can afford nannies. They can afford daycare. They can afford aftercare, so it doesn't bother them. And so until this issue bothers the wealthy and the men in charge, it's going to be a struggle to fix this and make it a priority to resolve. And this was built into systems that were created a century ago for a world that no longer exists. And we have yet to come to terms with that society today was designed for a society 100 years ago, and it is no longer the case. Things today don't exist that they did back then. And so you're not the problem. The design is the problem. And here's what I want. Here's what I know about you. Because you listen to this podcast, because you're in this conversation, you're already carrying more than the system was ever designed to make room for. And the work that you're doing is extraordinary. But I don't want you to just be extraordinary in the face of a broken system. I want you to see the system clearly. I want you to name it and call it out, because the more people we have that are frustrated, the more voices we have pushing back against systemic flawed design, that's fuel. That's fuel that we can use to advocate at your company for real flexibility. That's fuel to show up at your school board meeting to ask for change. That's fuel to vote for policies that treat childcare and school access as the infrastructure issue that it actually is. And it's fuel to stop apologizing for a gap that was never yours to close in the first place. And we are the ones, we working moms, are the ones that can absolutely make enough noise to change this. So be loud, be upset by it, be frustrated that it doesn't fit today's society, today's model of the world. Be angry about it, be vocal about it. And share this with another mom, another working mom who's also feeling the frustration of it. And we're going to start a revolution. We are redesigning, rebuilding working motherhood. I will see you in the next episode. And if no one said it today, you are doing an incredible job. Thank you.